Hello, 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 and welcome to Kindred Skulls. My name is Gregg Blake, and I am here as always with my lovely and talented co-host Matt Freese. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm
How'd
doing
you
well
spend your bye
today,
week?
Greg. I got a little bit of glow on me because the sun is coming directly into the window onto my face, so I had to pull the shade down a little bit to help
Well,
out with that.
you'll be squinting the whole time. Yeah.
But yeah, so no, it's all right. We're here on a Friday. I'm really looking forward to this. I just want to give guys a lot of credit for how they've done so far this year, and that's part of what we're doing. Obviously, we don't have a game to review, unlike usual.
Exactly. It's bye week, bye week awards week is what it is. And
Yeah.
I've got my celebratory poncho on. I'm in the mood. I'm vibing. I'm ready to go. Uh we were just talking before we started here. It's one of those years where it feels like some of our awards might be a little obvious this year because there's definitely standouts on the teams, guys who are clearly, head above the rest.
Yeah, I'm
But
kind of interested to see if we have what discrepancies we have and kind of how we disagree on that. I do think offense is kind of weird this year, right?
offense is weird.
Because the
I was
two most major pieces got hurt, but we'll see where we come to on that.
I was thinking the exact same thing when I was looking at it today. I was like, man, I don't know where we're going with that, but it'll be fun. So let's dive right in. Let's get down to business here. Bye week awards 2023. Let's start with our offensive player of the year. Matt, why don't you kick us off? And we'll ping pong back and forth here.
So
Who's your offensive player of
I
the year?
have
Oh, and we're
here.
sorry that Nick can't join us today. He sends his love to all of our listeners. He just wasn't able to hop on. He said that he vehemently disagrees with all of our choices. That's
Yes,
that's that's
obviously we're wrong. No. So offensive player of the year. I mean, I think in a normal year this goes to either Kirk Cousins or Justin Jefferson, right? But both of those guys are injured and out of this conversation for me, right? So I'm going to go with TJ Hawkinson because I think Hawk is kind of the focal point of our offense. And I know there was some consternation around him earlier in the year with some of the drops that he's had and some of the contested catch failures. And I really think he's kind of cleaned that up in recent weeks. Like there still have been one or two plays where it's not perfect, right? Guys aren't going to win every single contested catch opportunity that they get, and I think we kind of hyper focused on the consistent failures we were seeing from Hawkinson earlier in the season. And now, anytime he has a failure, even if it's pretty reasonable for him and he does have some contested catch wins, like that touchdown, it wasn't a major contested catch, but he had to work through contact on that touchdown against the Bears last week, right? That put the Vikings ahead. He leads the Vikings in targets with 108. He leads the Vikings in receptions with 80. He leads the Vikings in receiving yards with 786, right? So he's been the focal point of their passing game basically since Justin Jefferson went down. Obviously, Jefferson's the focal point with him in, but Hawkinson as the tight end has been productive in that capacity as the focal point, and it has opened up other stuff for guys like Jordan Addison and stuff like that. I also think that his value as a blocker, like his ability to both run block and have some chips and pass protection and stuff like that, and his ability combined with his ability, as a pass catcher, is what sets him apart. Um, on this team compared to other potential candidates. So like, I think the other real candidate from the skill positions at least is Jordan Addison, right? But I think he's just been more inconsistent than Hawkinson has been to me. So why don't you go ahead and give your pick here?
The Addison edition might be a little teaser to another category we have coming up, but I totally agree with what you're saying about TJ. Certainly a great candidate for Offensive Player of the Year, but not my candidate. I'm happy to say.
Sure.
We're starting off with a little bit of different choices, which I'm happy about actually.
I mean,
I was
I
worried,
think my answer is not the answer most people would have, so I have a pretty strong guess of who you're putting in there.
it's one you can really. It's a pretty small list this year, unfortunately. But I've got to go with Christian Darrisaw. I have to go with Christian Darrisaw. I look. You're much more of an offensive line minded person than I am. You pick up on all the details a lot
Hmm.
better than I do. I'm more when I think about offensive linemen. I think about them most when I'm not thinking about them. Like if I'm not concerned about how much pressure our quarterback is getting, I'm satisfied. If I see wide open lanes for my running backs to run through, I'm satisfied. I'm not thinking about the details as much as you guys do, but I have obviously noticed uh, this year seems to be a year where our quarterbacks have had some time to throw the ball, and our running backs, maybe not every week. It's not super consistent on the ground, but there are moments in games where it's very obvious we're dominating
Hmm.
in the run blocking department. And I think Christian Darrisaw is the anchor of all that. He's allowed, I think, 3 sacks this year total. Yeah, 3 sacks. He's only had a couple of penalties all year long, which is I think is a really important category
And the
for a tackle.
highlights, man. The highlights are what sells it on
The
Darisaw,
highlights,
right?
absolutely. You can go out there, you can find him. I know Matt's, you've done some cut ups on him too, and he's been a dominant force for the team this year. And it's one of those things where it's like we didn't have a true, pure, like franchise left tackle for the longest
Hmm.
time. And much like I feel like I say this a lot, but I start to take some of our great players for granted, like way too quickly. And I just want to take a moment to put a tag on Christian and say, man, it's so good to have a true franchise left tackle again. It's one of those things that it allows you to do whatever kind of team building that we're going to do next. Like knowing that that's locked down, it makes a huge, huge, huge difference to
Yeah.
our roster and what we're going to do forward. So he's my offensive player of the year. There you go. And
So
yeah,
yeah, no, I think Darisaw is a very valid one. My thing with Darisaw is I think that like I want to get this out of the way. I think that Darisaw is a franchise left tackle, right? I think he's probably a top 5 left tackle in the league, but he's definitively a top 10 left tackle in the NFL. I don't think he's quite as good as some of Vikings fandom has hyped him up to be, because I think the splash plays that we get to see and we highlight and we absolutely love, right, get plastered all over the place, at least from Vikings Twitter. And then there are some inconsistencies in his game. Like the 3 sacks that he's let up were legitimately on him, right? And they're like one-on-one losses by Christian Darrisaw that need to get shored up. I think there are pressures that are like that. I think the fourth interception by Josh Dobbs in the Bears game was he was in a bit of a tough spot, but ultimately he overset and wasn't able to get back inside, and Dobbs drifted into the pressure, which helped cause the interception, right? But it was a failure in a combination between Darrisaw not being able to block his guy, and it's quick game, so he tried to jump out quick, right, and he lost, and the guy came inside and was able to hit Dobbs and get the pressure. But you're still responsible for getting back inside and at least getting a hand and affecting that guy. I do think, and I do think that Kirk Cousins in particular has helped Christian Darrisaw's image throughout his time because of his ability to have short, confined dropbacks which protect Darrisaw around the edge, and we've seen a little bit more blemishes with Dobbs in the game. Now, all that is to say, I think Darrisaw has room to improve. He's still a phenomenal left tackle, right?
right,
So
right.
that's kind of where I look at Darrisaw and Hawkinson as pretty much on the same level, where they have a couple of high profile blemishes and misses this year to me. And I just think Hawkinson's, I don't know, this is probably like fantasy football bias or whatever you want to call it, right? But Hawkinson being a direct producer with the football and kind of being able to take over that load was pretty impressive. Like Darrisaw is number 2 on the OPOY list for me for the Vikings, right? He's just not quite number 1, and I do temper like the PFF has him as the highest graded tackle. Like I just don't buy that from the Vikings perspective that he is the best left tackle in the NFL. I think he's an excellent left tackle. He's just not the very best.
Okay. Okay. That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I got nothing against Hawk. I just feel like, the obvious candidates are gone, and I just wanted to
Yeah.
give Darisaw some love,
Yeah,
man. He's my
absolutely. And
player.
he absolutely deserves the love. And I think from a national perspective or from like a quote unquote O line Twitter perspective, he deserves more love than he gets from those guys sometimes. But I think Vikings fans taking it a little bit too far, which is perfectly fair. Like that's what fans should do about their team, right?
Well,
But
I'm not
like,
on Twitter, Matt. I'm not one of
yeah,
these Vikings fans, all right?
yeah. No, I
This is
it's
just
overall
armchair
I think
Greg.
he's an excellent player.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, let's move this thing along. Let's talk about our defensive player of the year candidates. This has I think a bigger list than any of us could have possibly expected of possible candidates for this. I have a feeling on this one we're both going to land on the same
Yeah.
individual, but Matt, why don't you kick us off here?
I,
Who's your defensive player of the
I
year?
think there are a couple of really intriguing hipster choices for this, right? Like if you were to be like, nah, the guy who is the obvious winner shouldn't be the winner, right? Like if you want to be a contrarian, I think there are a couple of really good options that you have. But the obvious answer is Daniil Hunter. Like I don't know how it could be another player. Like he's he doesn't have, from the overall perspective, like he doesn't have the dominant immediate wins that guys like Miles Garrett and TJ Watt and even Max Crosby have in terms of getting pressures on the quarterback like instantly. But that's never been his game. He's always been a junk ball pitcher in terms of as a rusher. Where he doesn't win immediately, but like at that 2.5 second mark, he has beaten his opposing tackle, right? And obviously he's ridiculously strong. He's ridiculously athletic. Like he probably has it in his tool bag to win that way. That Miles Garrett do, like dominant immediate wins, but it's just not what he goes to from a contain and from like a defensive perspective overall. So he doesn't have the gaudy ESPN pass rush win rate numbers that like a Micah Parsons has, right? And he probably doesn't have the immediate burst that a Micah Parsons has to be able to get those pressures, right? Maybe to that level. But obviously he's been dominant. Like he leads the NFL in sacks, right? Like 13 and a half sacks. He's tied for the lead with TJ Watt. He has a ridiculous number of tackles for loss. I think he's tied for the lead. He has the lead league in terms of tackles for loss on defense. He's been dominant in the run game. Like a tight end cannot block him in the run game, and he's a mismatch against most offensive tackles defending the run. He's part of the reason the Vikings run defense has been so good this year. So, I think that's a big part of it. His effort shows up every single week. There's a hustle play from Daniil Hunter where he's chasing things down from behind. His ability to sniff out screens and delete all of those sort of plays are part of the reasons the Vikings defense has been so effective this year at limiting short throws. Like just everything he's done this year has been really impressive. He is almost an NFL defensive player of the year candidate, and as the season goes on, honestly, I think his resume has gotten more and more impressive. Like in the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season when he was leading the league in sacks, but Miles Garrett was absolutely crushing everybody he went against. I thought Miles Garrett was kind of the obvious choice over him. Now Miles Garrett, I think, has cooled off a little bit from that perspective. So I think Hunter enters the mix with those guys to be a true DPOY candidate. So I think he's just the obvious answer from this team, and nobody else even comes close to him. Even if I like a couple other options, like I really like what Cam Bynum has done this year, and I really like what
Yeah,
Josh Metellus
Cam
has
would have
done this
been.
year. But
Yeah,
Hunter's just a step above both of those.
yeah, I totally agree with everything. I unfortunately don't have a lot to add. I mean, I think dedicated listeners will remember I was advocating for trading Daniil before the season started, and I had my reasons for that. And I think that the team decided to still compete this year. And our final record may not match our ambitions, but it's not going to be Daniil Hunter's fault. That's for damn sure.
And let's be
He's
clear with Hunter too. He is the only guy on this team who is competitive as a pass rusher. Like he's the only guy who can win one-on-ones as a pass rusher. So opposing teams
right.
are going to focus in on that. So it makes it harder for him to get pressures in general.
Daniil Hunter is so good that people are actually think considering DJ Wanham as like a really talented player right now. Like
Right.
that's how good Daniil Hunter is. He's having a true impact. He's like, I think this word gets used a lot, maybe more than it needs to these days, but like an impact player, like someone who makes all of the people around him
Mm-hmm.
better, like
And
truly changes the game changer. That's Daniil Hunter, and it's great to see, especially after the injury plagued years he's had. Maybe some of us kind of forgot what he's capable of, and I'll put
yeah,
myself on the list. Maybe I'm one of them, but definitely has had a huge year.
yeah.
So really awesome.
The best thing about Hunter, I've kind of been personally like going for this all year, is I'm able to clip a highlight of him as a pass rusher, as a run defender, and as like either a pass defender or like a hustle sort of play. Every single week, I get at least one of those, which is like a true highlight from him. I do love what Flores has been doing in terms of getting him matched up on centers more often. It's not like Zadarius Smith where we were doing it constantly for him last year, but it's probably a couple reps a game where Hunter gets to go one on one against a center and absolutely demolishes that guy. So it's been really fun to see that sort of stuff moving him around the formation. But the thing with the Vikings defense is Hunter is not always the focal point of the blitz. He is not always the person we are trying to spring free. A lot of times it's a safety or a linebacker who ends up springing free because, the offense is going to try to block the bigs on the Vikings defense, right? They're not going to let the guys in the 90s beat them, right? They're going to let the guys in the 40s and 20s and that sort of thing beat them kind of as rushers. So, with the Vikings blitz heavy scheme, I think it has kind of dampened Hunter's potential pressure numbers and that sort of thing as well. But overall, just an absolutely phenomenal player. Like he's such a
Yeah.
joy to watch every week. So it's been great.
Very clearly defensive player of the
Yeah.
year. All right, let's keep moving along here. Let's bounce back to the offense.
Yep.
And you know, there's no amount of preamble that I can lead with here that's gonna make this any less obvious a choice. I think we both know exactly who it is, but Matt, why don't you tell us who's our offensive rookie of the year?
Yeah, offensive rookie of the year, obviously Jordan Addison.
Jordan
He's
Addison.
he's really the only rookie that's made a significant impact on offense. If I'm safe in saying that,
Yeah,
like
you're very
I
safe in saying
I
that.
guess Jaron Hall, got a couple snaps. But I can't even think of anybody else who even has had significant snaps on offense.
Okay,
Um,
I'm glad that you said that because I was actually racking my brain just now for who were our offensive rookies. I can't even
yeah.
remember beyond Addison.
So
So,
so
okay,
and,
so
and and we didn't add all that many, right? It was a very defense focused draft for the Vikings this year. So it's really not a surprise overall. So Jordan Addison, obviously, and he's not just rookie of the year by default on offense, right? I think even if we had other significant producers, like he
good
was
point.
arguably in the mix for offensive player of the year for Vikings. And
Yeah,
that's because of the JJ injury, right? And the Kirk Cousins injury that he's even in that conversation. But I think his ability to step up and be a true number one in a couple of games has helped the Vikings, and it kind of helped the Vikings continue their win streak or start their 5 game win streak that they had, right? Once JJ
right.
got hurt.
Well, yeah,
Um,
and I maybe did undercut at Jordan a little bit with my
yeah,
my lead in there. Like there was a point earlier, and he's cooled off a little bit. Jordan has the
yeah, and
last
he
couple of weeks,
has.
but there was a point earlier in the season where he was on track for rookie records. I mean, he
Yeah.
was looking like the next coming of JJ here. So definitely do not want to minimize his impact just because there's not a lot of competition
And
for this
he's not
award.
the NFL offensive rookie of the year, right? That's CJ Stroud, I think, obviously at this point. And even among the receivers, like a couple of other guys have been extremely productive. But like you look at a guy who was drafted just before him in Quentin Johnston, who's having a really rough go of it. And I think he's even been more productive than Zay Flowers and Jackson, both Zay Flowers and Jackson Smith and Jigba, the 3 receivers that were drafted immediately before he was. So he's had that impact. Part of it's been by necessity for the Vikings, right? Like he's had to step into that number one role. And I don't think he's a true number one NFL receiver. We talked on the last episode a bit about how he needs to work on play strength and like finishing contested catches, right? Like because he gets the ball in his hands and he has control of it. And then a defensive back is able to knock it out. So that's been the issue for me a little bit with Addison, but his ability to get open is undeniable, right? His ability as a route runner and his ability to get open with timing with the quarterback on time in the place he's supposed to be, I think is very good. I think we just need to work on the hands a little bit and that kind of play strength, which is something that was obviously a concern due to his lack of size coming out. But like, let me pull up his stats here real quick. He's had 54 catches, 686 yards. Now this is through 12 games, so that's on pace for just under 1,000, I would bet. And 7 touchdowns. The 7 touchdowns has been huge, right? His ability as a number 2 was absolutely outstanding when Justin Jefferson was in the game because he'd be our explosive big play receiver, you know, and that's a phenomenal role to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something I was wanting to mention too. It's like, you know, he may not be a number one. He may not be ever really his, well, certainly while he's in Minnesota here, it's not going to be his role, but he is like a tremendous compliment to JJ. Like,
Yep.
yeah, if you double JJ, if you're tripling JJ, Jordan Addison can absolutely cook one-on-one coverage. He can go deep. He can run underneath. He can do everything you need from a number two to really like
Hmm.
make a huge impact on the field. So it's awesome that it's an awesome luxury. I whined a little bit about drafting receiver in the first. But I definitely was 100% wrong about that. It's clear how big an impact that's going to have currently and has had and will have in our future
Yeah.
here as we build this thing.
I I mean, before the draft, I was vocal that I didn't really want Jordan Addison, but I get it, and I think I was a little bit wrong from the perspective of like Jordan Addison doesn't need to be the number one. Like I still have the play strength questions for him becoming a true number one in the NFL. Great, I don't really care about that because we have Justin Jefferson, and
Exactly,
so
exactly.
like at the end of the day, like if he's just a phenomenal number two receiver, that's a win from a first round pick.
Huge win.
You put
Totally
two of
agree.
those guys on the field, so yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, cool. All right. So, anything else you want to add about Rookie of the Year there on offense?
In terms of offense, no, we just haven't had the snaps really from other guys. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, uh, I'm trying to remember the name of the running
Oh
back.
my goodness. Dwayne McBride,
Yeah, McBride. I
who's
was
the
thinking
practice
Trey
squad
McBride. I'm like, no, that's a
champion.
tight end. That's a tight end.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not
and
Dwayne
Ty
McBride, I don't think.
Chandler does not is not a rookie, so nobody
Yeah,
who
he's not a
thinks he
rookie
should
either.
start over he's not deserving of the
Yeah.
award anyway. But nobody who thinks he should start over Madison is. Anyway, let's flip it over to the defensive side.
Let's move on. Yeah, let's not belabor that. All right. So rookie of the year on defense. Now, I think this has some really interesting candidates. I know who mine is, but I'm curious to hear who yours is, Matt. We've definitely got some rookies making an impact over there, doing a good job developing. Who is your rookie of the year on defense, Matt?
To me, it's Ivan Pace Jr. I think you have two options. I think you got him or Blackman, and Ivan Pace has just been more impressive in his role than Blackman has been to me. I saw something going around that like Blackman's like the highest rated rookie corner or something per PFF. I don't quite buy that. Like I don't quite buy that he's been the best rookie cornerback, or and he's played significant snaps, and I think he's played a lot better in recent weeks, but early on he did struggle a little bit. I thought the Chargers game was a particularly good example of a little bit frustrating play from Mekhi Blackman, just in terms of he was playing a little bit too soft or he wasn't tight enough in his zone coverages. Ivan Pace has some blemishes as well, right? Like particularly when he is asked to drop back in coverage, he does struggle a little bit with that as well. But just his ability to go forward is absurd. We've talked about it all year, right? His ability in college to just avoid offensive linemen and work through trash and beat offensive linemen who are pass protecting and beat running backs who were trying to pass protect against him in college has translated immediately to the NFL. And that was my biggest concern, like his size, right? And not even his size, because he's short at 5'10, but he's pretty compact and powerful at 230. The problem was, especially against offensive linemen, is length, right? And offensive linemen in the NFL are going to be more athletic, more able to get to linebackers at the second level, which he was really able to avoid well in college. Like offensive linemen trying to climb to the second level just couldn't get a hand on him and couldn't block him. And they can't do that in space in the NFL either, right? And being able to jump from a group of five school in Cincinnati going against offensive linemen in the MAC, right, who aren't high level athletes generally, right? They're more big guys than high level athletes at that kind of level, and do that against guys who are significantly better at their craft at the NFL level has been really impressive to me. And if there's a reason he went undrafted, it's because teams thought he couldn't do that at the NFL level, and he's proven them
Right,
wrong immediately.
right.
So that's what's been phenomenal for me. He's a nightmare. He puts running backs in a blender when he's blitzing. Right, the sack he had against Justin Fields was just absurd. He basically teleported around the running back. Right, like he just made the guy look like he couldn't move at
Ole,
all, and then
ole.
wrapped up one of the most difficult people to bring down in the NFL in Justin Fields too, and actually brought him to the ground, which is something the Vikings struggled to corral all game. Right, like but Ivan Pace was the guy who was able to do it. Just the juice he has, coming forward. in the run game. He blew up a guard in that Bears game, which is something you don't see. His ability to work through traffic to the outside is absurd. Guys can't lay hands on him. Like it's some of the best I've seen from anybody. Like if, you know, Kendricks was great working sideline to sideline. Ivan Pace is better in terms of his ability to move through traffic than Kendricks was, which is like a crazy thing to say.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring up Eric Kendricks because I don't know if you saw Anthony Barr compared Ivan Pace to Eric Kendricks this week in an interview. So that was pretty amazing. And I do
Yep.
agree, he's very similar play style in the sense of how they move, how quick they are. And yeah, I don't think there's any other choice for me either. I mean, I hate to be so agreeable, picking the same guys, but Ivan Pace is one of my favorite players on defense right now, and
Yeah.
and has become so very quickly. Pat ourselves on the back for talking about him as early as we did, you in particular, Matt. We talked about it at the beginning of the year
Yeah.
in the offseason. We
Prior
talked about
prior to training
how,
camp, I thought he had a clear role on this team.
yeah,
I wasn't as early as some people were. There were definitely people who were earlier than me on Ivan Pace, but
sure,
I think that I think we saw the vision, especially in this defense with him coming forward.
yeah,
You were able to see that prior to the
yeah.
season.
Because we knew the effort would be there. It was just going to be a
Hmm.
question of, could he could he translate, like you said, and clearly he has. And it's kind of absurd that we added what is going to be a long-term option at linebacker, undrafted, which is like that's an incredible plus. That's an A
And
plus, obviously, for Kwesi, and really really cool.
yeah, and he's wearing the green dot right now too, with
Yeah,
Jordan Hicks out. So
I mean, you pretty much like
he's taken on the mental load and responsibility of running the defense from the signal perspective.
this is like Ivan Pace is like cheating at Madden. It's like if you're playing in a franchise in Madden and you really need a middle linebacker, so you just sign some guy off free agency, undrafted, and you bump up all his stats, and now you have a middle
Yep.
linebacker. Like that's basically what we did, which is just absurd. It's really awesome. Probably one of, if not the most underrated thing that Kwesi pulled off this year is that addition. Really,
And
really
I
cool.
argued against Makai Blackman's candidacy a little bit earlier. I think he's been playing well for a rookie. I don't want to overstate like a couple of the blemishes that I think he's had. I think that he has fit in, and like for a 100 overall pick or whatever he was, like 103 or something, the very end of that third round in the compensatory pick range, I think he's played excellent as a corner who's needed to take on a relatively significant role. I think Jaquelin Roy has really flashed in a couple of the snaps he had. Obviously, Sheldon Day is now playing over him, so it's the coaching staff isn't like all in on Jaquelin Roy as a starter, but I think there is something to develop there, and we really haven't seen much. I think from any of the other players. I don't think Jay Ward's gotten a lot of playing time. Um, but just overall, the Vikings, a couple of really true starters and true impact players from the rookie class on both sides of the ball. So it's nice. You got three players who are playing at like they are good to be on the field, and the Vikings took one player in the top 100 of this draft, right? So like seeing that development and seeing that finding of those younger players has been really impressive to me.
Absolutely. Totally agreed. All right, let's move on to our next category here. So this one's an interesting one. I have a pick in mind. I'm curious to see who yours is, though. Matt, who is your most improved player for the Minnesota Vikings in 2023?
So for me, it's going to be Josh Metellus, and I'm wavering back and forth a
Interesting.
little bit on this one. I think there are two other really good candidates. Um,
Yeah, are
and
they, just out of curiosity, don't say who it is because I want there to be some surprise for my pick.
the
It is
other two,
different.
one defense and one offense.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
So for me, I think to come from somebody who wasn't seeing the field at all to being someone who is a legitimate starter and like a high quality player, like I don't think that Josh Metellus is going to make the Pro Bowl. I don't think that Josh Metellus, maybe as a quote unquote pure safety, deserves to make the Pro Bowl over somebody else, or one of the players that's going to make it, or as a pure linebacker deserves to make the Pro Bowl as somebody else who's going to make it. But he's playing extremely well in a role that's unique to him in the NFL. Like what Metellus is doing is something no other player I think in the NFL really does, because he's basically a box dime kind of linebacker for the Vikings, but also he's constantly asked to go from the line of scrimmage to play in deep coverage, which is just like a crazy ask of anybody, but he's processed it really well and he's done a really good job of that. So like, the Vikings, when they run their blitz mug looks of everybody up on the line of scrimmage, Josh Metellus is somebody who's in the middle of that defense up on the line of scrimmage, and then he has to back all the way out into a deep Tampa zone, right? Being the deep hole player in Tampa. He's done it into a true cover 3 zone a couple of times too, right? Where he is true deep coverage all the way in the back of the field. The interception he has, and he's recorded like every single type of stat, right? He's got a sack and a half, he's got an interception, he's got 3 forced fumbles, he's got a fumble recovery, right? So it's like he's kind of all over the place making these plays. In the Saints game in particular, he was absolutely amazing as a blitzer. It was kind of the Ivan Pace thing where the guys could not get a hand on him, rushing the passer. I think he's done a really good job rushing the passer. He created a Danielle Hunter sack and this is maybe a little bit of recency bias, but he created that Danielle Hunter sack in the Denver game where he put a hand on Garrett Bowles, the left tackle, to free up Danielle Hunter to come out around the edge. Like, he's playing really unselfish football as that type of player. So I just think he's been really impressive. He's able to man cover tight ends. He's tight end zone, and he's a phenomenal tackler too, which is something you very much need from that role. So like, he's asked to play on the line of scrimmage and run defense, take on those blocks. He's asked to play deep coverage against receivers and tight ends. He's asked to be a blitzer and beat running backs and pass protection players as a blitzer. He's asked to do everything, and I think he's doing it at a pretty high level right now. I don't think it's like a unique game-changing level, but I think the level of improvement from somebody who wasn't even on the field, and I don't know, maybe it's not fair to put him as most improved, right? Because we hadn't seen what he was able to do previously, but I
No,
just
I think
really
it's
like what
totally
he's done.
fair. I think it's totally fair. It doesn't matter if
Mm-hmm.
you're coming off the bench from the year prior or whatever. If you've been in the NFL and you
Yeah,
suddenly you're making a huge impact on defense, which Metellus is, I think it's an excellent choice, honestly. Like,
and the progression, right, from 6th round draft pick for the Vikings to special teams ace, right, played a million special team snaps the last 3 seasons, to get a surprise contract extension that people really weren't expecting. That was for a decent chunk of change. I think it was $6 million a year for 2 years, up to $6 million a year for 2 years on the extension. To playing 90+% of the snaps. He's 4th on the defense in snaps, behind Smith, Murphy, and Bynum. Harrison Smith.
right,
And
right.
I guess we don't have 2 Smiths on the defense anymore. I've gotten so used to like Za'Darius last year and Harrison Phillips coming in last
Yeah,
year really threw me off from Harrison Smith, because it was like you used to just be able to say Smith or Harrison or something like that,
Harry,
but
baby.
now you got to compete with everything. Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah, most improved player for me, Josh Metellus. Just his progression has been awesome as a player for the
yeah.
Vikings.
Excellent choice. Kind of shocked that I didn't think of Metellus. That's probably a mistake on my
Mm-hmm.
part, but I picked someone else. And this one's probably not a huge surprise either, but um, I've got to go with Cam Bynum.
Yeah,
And the reason I'm going with Cam is, I mean, if you want to look at stats, he's matched his interception in through 12 games. He's matched his interception total. He's got more pass deflections. He has a forced fumble this year. He's got more solo tackles, more assisted tackles, more. He's
it's
so
crazy.
on a stat level, he's improved in literally every single category already through 12 games. Um, and he's gone from a guy that I anticipated us replacing, through the draft
Mm-hmm.
with Steen, to someone who's become pretty much irreplaceable. I think if you look at the way he plays within this defense as well, his ability to play safety, also drop down to nickel, go on blitzes. He's got a QB hit this year, which is something he doesn't have a lot of in his career. He's playing behind the line more often. He's just been he's all over the field. He's extremely charismatic. He's got an interesting story. Just really he has become the clear and obvious starter on this team, which is something the Vikings already knew, but I think the rest of us were kind of catching up to as the
Yeah.
year started, and it's been very obvious that he belongs out there and he
Yeah.
belongs to be a starter. And so that's definitely a huge improvement to me.
In
Just in terms of like my expectations for the player and what he's the levels he's gotten to now.
Yeah, I was trying to finagle like an award to get Cam Bynum in because my answer was Metellus for this, but like for me, Bynum is the player who played a lot last year that we saw who has improved the most, right? If that makes sense, where we didn't
Yeah,
see anything from Metellus, so it's nice to see this progression. Bynum had a really rough year last year, and I think the scheme change has made a huge improvement in his game because I think the biggest complaint about I had about Bynum, like his deep coverage wasn't really a concern for me. It was coming forward and making tackles in the run game. And he's been outstanding at coming from
totally.
depth and making tackles in the run game. I think the defense has just um, you know, reduced any sort of hesitancy he had from last year's scheme, which may have been what was causing it, and just asked him to go play football and come forward and make tackles. And he's done that at a really high level this year, which again was something I was weak complained about it kind of week after week after week last year in terms of his ability to come forward and make those tackles in the run game. So to see the 180 flip and be one of the like maybe the best player on the team at doing that this year has been really astounding. The other guy to potentially shout out on offense is Ed Ingram, who went from really, really having a poor season last year to having a solid season this year. Like, I think he's been a quality starter, let's say, for the Vikings this year. Not a top right guard by any means, but a quality starter. I think, his improvement has been part of the reason that the Vikings offensive line has been much better this year than it has been, pretty much throughout the entire Kirk Cousins tenure with the Vikings. So
Absolutely.
I think that those two guys were the honorable mentions for me on that.
Agreed. Agreed. Good choices. Good choices. And I got to say, boy, we really turned things around on defense this year. I mean, it's just very clear, like just from
Oh,
how we're talking about this team right now, like that is where the most improvement has happened, and it's been really awesome to see.
it's crazy.
Kudos to
Yeah.
yeah, kudos to Brian Flores. This is how they drew it up when they brought him in. All right, let's talk about. This is a fun category. Okay, let's talk about our most underrated player. I may have a little surprise for you on this one, but I don't know. Let's find out. Matt, who is your most underrated player for the Minnesota Vikings in
My most
2023?
underrated player, and I don't know, maybe this is Vikings fans do give him some love, but I've been trying to drive this train a little bit in recent weeks, and it's Harrison Phillips. He does so much dirty
Wow.
work on the
Okay.
inside of the defensive line. Like he's an absolutely outstanding run defender. You can't run it at him or Jonathan Bullard, who is maybe somewhat of a candidate for this as well. But you just can't run the ball at him. Like you can't move him off of the line of scrimmage. He keeps Ivan Pace and Josh Metellus very clean from the linebacker level coming up to make plays on the running back in the backfield. He's made a ton of tackles. Like I don't know where he's at in terms of total tackles, but for a nose tackle, like it's been a really impressive number of him making solo tackles on the plays. He's actually at 34 solo tackles, which I bet if we and 68 combined tackles, which I bet if we went across nose tackles in the NFL, that's really on the upper end of that number. And he's done it, with strength, with his ability to play with leverage. The other thing that came up recently, and I think we talked about this in an episode a couple weeks ago, but Flores said in a press conference that he is the shift coordinator on the defensive line. So you might notice the Vikings immediately before the snap making late defensive line shifts. I think we talked about this after the New Orleans game when we got them to jump a false start on that 4th and 1. We also did it in the Atlanta game the week before when they had the 1st and goal after the after the one fumble. We got them to jump and set them back and prevented conversions on both of those drives from a late shift laterally causing the offensive line to jump, right? And that has helped with pressures. That in the Saints game helped get Josh Metellus free a number of times, the Vikings shifting late. Harrison Phillips is in charge of that movement for the Vikings defensive line. So I think he's really understanding the mental side and has done the dirty work to be that kind of player. And it just got announced this week. He does a really ton of work off the field, in terms of helping kids, I believe, with disabilities and maybe some developmental disabilities there. So he's the Vikings Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee. So that's great to see from him off the field too. He's really been a community leader as well since he's gotten here. That doesn't really go into my vote for this award. I kind of had that determined prior to this, but it's really cool to see what he's been able to do off the field as a person, right, and then on the field as a player as well.
That's always a good feeling. Really interesting choice, Matt. I am gonna pivot a little bit. I'm gonna go a different direction, and I'm going right back to our defensive rookie of the year. I'm going to say our most underrated player this year is Ivan Pace. And the
Excellent.
reason, yeah, the reason I'm saying that is not because nobody's talking about him. It's not because, I think everybody's on the same page here, but I just don't think it can be understated how unbelievable this
Yeah.
edition is. We already talked about it a little bit, so I won't repeat the points, but just the fact that this is even happening is I don't know if it's going to be possible to appreciate how ridiculous it is to get, we could be looking at a Pro Bowl appearance here for him. Like that's to come off the street,
Mm-hmm.
post draft to being in the conversation as one of the best, middle linebackers in the league is insane. So
Yeah.
he's going to be my most underrated player, but maybe a little bit of a cop out there. I don't know.
No, a couple other guys who I think have at least some cases for this. Want to give them honorable mentions. Byron Murphy, I think, is like a star as a cornerback. I don't think he's an elite, like a true shutdown corner, but I think he gets a little bit of like the PFF grades on Byron Murphy to me have just been absolutely terrible, and I don't really understand why he's been graded so low. In there, he's been playing as a true starter, as a true number one corner, and then Brandon Powell for me is kind of the second player that I think has played way above the level to which I would have expected him to play. Right, like Brandon Powell is a true he's a playable wide receiver. Right, there's an art you could make an argument that he should maybe be the Vikings wide receiver three or at least see significant snaps. Um, Now that Justin Jefferson is back. So Byron Murphy and Brandon Powell, I just wanted to give shout outs and honorable mentions to those two guys.
Good ones indeed. That was a fun category. All right, so let's move on to one of the categories that I struggle with every year that we do this, but let's do it anyway. Let's talk about our position coach of the year. Matt, kick us off once again.
How many
Who is
Vikings
our
position coaches? I'm putting you on the spot here, Greg. How many Vikings position coaches can you actually name?
Well, I knew what two positions I wanted to focus on, so I
There we go.
Googled them. So that should tell you. So that should tell you everything. It's funny. I am usually more in tune. I think it's been the last I don't know 4 or 5 years that I've stopped being as on top of the position coaches as I used to be. I don't know if it's
I'm I'm going to
my
be honest.
fandom or
I probably couldn't name them all off the top of my head. However, I think for me the answer is Durante Jones, the defensive backs coach. Just we talked about the improvement from Cam Bynum and Josh Metellus in the most improved players. We talked about Mekhi Blackman as a potential defensive rookie of the year for this defense. I think because of what you've seen from those guys, and this is an entirely new cornerback room for the Vikings, right? Well, that's not true. Caleb Evans is there, and he may have been a candidate for most improved player if he wasn't dealing with injuries this year. I think he's played pretty solidly. I don't think he's a star corner, but I think he's a clear starter in the NFL. Out of Caleb Evans. So I think, the combination of all those players we've talked about improving well in a very difficult ask for this defense, the Vikings are blitzing so often that it puts a lot of stress on the coverage. And it's not, stress in man coverage like we've seen from previous Horrors defense. We've covered this, right? It's a lot more zone coverage, but that doesn't mean there aren't super wide zones, right? He's got these guys playing with their hair on fire, right? They make tackles, they completely limit yards after the catch, and that's something you might see defensive backs give up on some level. So I think Durante Jones, who's new this year, deserves a lot of credit for that.
yeah, great choice. Honestly, was my 1A as well, but I'll give you my 1B because it'll be more interesting to listen to.
Yeah.
My choice for position coach of the year is Chris Cooper,
Yeah.
our offensive line coach. I think he's been with the team I think 2 years, So a lot of the improvement on the line, something that we whined and complained about as a fan base for many years now, almost directly correlates with his arrival. So it's one of those things. It's hard to know, exactly how much of that is the players improving themselves, and but for the sake of just logistically looking at it, I mean, his arrival coincides with our improvement on the line. So I got to give him some credit. I hope he sticks around. I hope it continues. Ed Ingram is, who knows how much of an impact he's had on him. You were talking about him earlier. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I got to give some love to our offensive line coach. But yeah, there were a couple of choices we could have gone with here. I really like your selection though.
No,
Um,
I think that Chris Cooper was my runner up. I think an honorable mention is Keenan McCardell because just the development, like getting Jordan Addison in this offense, hitting the ground running with him, Brandon Powell becoming a legit player, seeing solid play out of KJ Osborne. Like I think KJ Osborne kind
Absolutely.
of gets a bad rap because he is who he is kind of as a wide receiver three, but he's a solid wide receiver three. And then I believe it's Chris O'Hara, the assistant quarterbacks coach, or is he? Oh, it's actually Grant Udinsky, who I wanted to pop out because he's the guy who was working with Josh Dobbs of the Josh Dobbs week. Like I think that week was so special, against the
Right.
Falcons that he deserves at least a little bit of a shout out here for his ability to kind of get him in the offense enough and prepared enough to go out there and play and still wing it a little bit, right? But like win the Vikings a football game was really impressive.
And if you want to have a little fun, go check out some Keenan McCardell highlights from back in the day when he was on the Jags, man. He's
Oh
fun.
yeah,
I'm glad he's on our team.
yeah. No, he's been a phenomenal. Like Keenan McCardell is probably the best individual position coach that the Vikings have. Like he's tabbed to be an offensive coordinator somewhere soon, probably.
Right, right. Good choices, good choices. Very, very top-notch coaching staff. Coach Kev has put together. So, and that does it, folks. That's our 2023 bye-week awards. And exciting and fun as it was, we do have some season left to play. So, Matt, let's talk a little bit, briefly about the Raiders. Got a big game against the Raiders this week. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
fair to say, it's not we've got to win three more games, but this feels like about as close to a true must-win as we've had.
Yeah,
Dropping these last two games puts us in a position where losing to the Raiders, it's not, only technically, it doesn't technically put a wrap on your season, but it definitely won't feel good.
yeah. I mean,
Well,
when we were coming off of the Saints game, 3 weeks ago at this point, and looking at the rest of the Vikings schedule, what like a lot of people I think thought the Vikings were like almost certainly going to make the playoffs, right? Because you look at it and you're like, really, they need to win about 3 games for the rest of the year, right? And the first 3 games you kind of marked off as wins, right? And now we
right,
lost to the Broncos and the Bears in
right.
those 2 weeks, and the Broncos are maybe a bit of a better team at that point. The Bengals game didn't look as easy. It looks better now, although with how Jake Browning looked on on Monday night, I guess it was
I
just
can't even believe
crazy.
it. That's so
I
crazy. Anyway, go on. Yeah.
Vikings legend Jake Browning, right? But they really need to win this game, and then they need to win either the Bengals or the Packers game, and they need to steal one against the Lions, and then they have a decent shot at making the playoffs at
Well,
this
let's
point
let's just
to
call it
get to
what it
9
is. You
wins.
can't lose. You
Yeah,
cannot lose the Las Vegas Raiders coming off a bye week
and expect
with
to
as
make the
much
playoffs.
right with as much as
Yeah,
is at stake right now. And I think that our team is probably fully aware of that fact. You
yeah.
can't lose this game. You
I,
can't. It's just not. There's no excuse for it. Got to win
Yeah,
this one.
absolutely. And I think the Raiders are not a complete dumpster fire of a football team, right? They were when Josh McDaniels was the head
I
coach
was going to
because,
say, a few weeks ago, we would have said, yeah, absolutely, dumpster fire, top five pick, all that. But it seems like they've kind of evened things out. Do you want to get into
but
the nitty gritty here?
yeah. So on offense, I think, right, just Josh McDaniels was such a cancer in that building for the whole team that really it kind of brought the level of play down, right? And Jimmy Garoppolo didn't play great, but he should be able to be a competent quarterback. And he just was not a competent quarterback, right? I mean, again, Kyle Shanahan, everything Kyle Shanahan touches turns to gold from the offensive side and from the quarterback side, right? But like, he like Jimmy Garoppolo has played enough NFL games where he should be a competent starter, and the Josh McDaniels factor I just think completely shut that down. So now they have Aiden O'Connell in there, right? Rookie out of Purdue, kind of more in the, let's say, Jake Browning mold, right, where he's a undersized, or I don't know what his size is, but he's not an athletic quarterback, and he doesn't have a big arm, right? He is a Bailey
Move,
Zappi kind of mold,
move,
where in
move the
college
stick.
he's kind of a drop back, throw the ball a million times, and be very successful spreading that out because he's a strong decision maker and he can process things quickly, right? That's the benefit for him. That's a good thing against the Vikings defense, but it's also where you get yourself into the Bears throwing a million screens against our offense kind of thing, right? Where if you're taking the first thing the Vikings are giving you every single time, you better have a creative play caller to maximize what you're getting, because the Vikings are taking away the boring answers, or like the first answer to the problems that their defense presents, right? The screen answer that the Bears ran a million times against the Vikings, they're taking that away on defense no matter what, right? The Chargers saw that, developed throughout the course of the game, and came up with a little bit more interesting answers, and that's why they were able to be successful, right? Justin Herbert was getting rid of the ball immediately, and he's more talented at doing that than Aiden O'Connell is, right? I don't want to say Aiden O'Connell can do what Justin Herbert did, but you're going to look on that spectrum of getting rid of the ball at the top of your drop every single snap and trying to win after the catch or something like that, or trying to scheme something open enough that it wins. Um, the Raiders have talent on the outside, right? They've got Devontae Adams, who is still one of the best receivers in the NFL.
And they
He's
still have Josh Jacobs,
and they
who
still
he's been
have
a little
Josh Jacobs as a
up and
running back,
down.
and they can run the football with them. And I don't
Yep.
think their offensive line is as complete of a dumpster fire as you look at the roster and be like, I can't name any of these guys. Who is Andre James? And I think they can play cohesively, kind of as a unit on that offensive line, and they've had some success recently doing that. So it's not like we're gonna, like, I don't know. We got to see some uniquely bad offense from a Bears team that still won the freaking football game against us because we turned the ball over
Right.
4 times, right?
Right.
Like, but they're not gonna make the same mistake that Bears offense made against the defense, which made it so easy for the Vikings defense to dominate them. They're not gonna let Danielle Hunter be a free rusher on multiple snaps, like at the quarterback for no reason, and block a safety instead. Like, they're just not gonna do that from an offensive perspective to me.
Right.
They're going to be a little bit more competent, so the defense will have to step up in a number of ways, and I think they're going to be capable of doing that, right? I think the defense is good on top of the Bears making a bunch of mistakes, and that's why we held them to that, because Justin Fields was still able to do things by himself. Aiden O'Connell is not going to be able to create things as an individual player, but he's going to get the quick things right and let the guys who can be playmakers. Like, I think Devontae Adams is a very good receiver. I think that Jacoby Myers is a very good receiver. Like, he might be one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL, just in terms of his ability to be productive and do good things when he's on the football field. I think they've got solid tight ends in Michael Mayer and Austin Hooper, who are like pass catching options and
Yeah.
also solid blockers. So like I think there's value there on that offense, and O'Connell can act as a distributor. Um, I still think the Vikings will probably limit that Raiders offense, just because I don't think Aiden O'Connell is like some sort of world beating quarterback, right? So like the Vikings should limit them to 20 points or under 20 points, and it'll be on the Vikings offense to score enough to win that football game at that point.
Right. And getting JJ back,
Yeah.
let's switch over to the defensive side a little bit here. We get JJ back this week. How do you think that's going to have an impact on the way we attack their defense? What do you know about the Raiders defense? Because
So
I don't know a lot.
uh,
I'll be honest with you.
so the
I,
Raiders
I've
best
I've avoided the Raiders completely this year. I've
so
not
the
watched a
Raiders
single minute.
best corners are Amik Robertson and Nate Hobbs. Nate Hobbs, I believe, typically plays in the slot, and Amik's been playing on the outside, which is actually kind of the opposite of what you saw going in. I really liked Amik Robertson coming out of Louisiana Tech. He's a really feisty player, like an in-your-face man coverage player. The problem with him was he was small, right? He's like 5'9". He's pretty undersized. He doesn't have long arms. So he ended up being a fourth round pick the same year we drafted Cam Dantzler, I believe. So that was the 2020 draft, I guess, right? Um, but he's turned into a quality player. I think he's a little bit high variance, and he will get beat at times, and then he will also be able to shut guys down. So I think that's a negative matchup against a guy like Justin Jefferson, right, as your top corner. It's impossible for pretty much anybody to cover Justin Jefferson, but a high variance guy is really going to struggle against a guy who's going to beat him more often than not, right? So I think that that's like there's a weakness there in the secondary. I also think that up front it's pretty much Crosby and nobody in terms of a pass rush on that
Max
defense, right? It's kind of like the Vikings.
Max Max Crosby sounds like someone who makes baked good items somewhere in the UK.
Okay, well,
Crosby Bakery.
yes, the Crosby Bakery. You know what I mean. I mean Max
Yeah, Max
Crosby.
Crosby's cooking up
Um,
sacks. Max Crosby's cooking up
cooking
snacks.
up scones. Yeah, let's get some dry baked goods from the
Yeah,
UK, um,
yeah.
to have with our tea. Uh,
Sorry, I'm watching the Great British Bake Off, so that immediately set
oh,
me
it's
off.
it's a phenomenal show though.
I love
Great
that show.
British Bake Off. It's such a wonderful show.
It's so
They
good.
it just makes you leave feeling good, frankly.
Comforting. Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Yeah,
but hopefully the Raiders defense will allow the Vikings to leave feeling good, right? Like Max
absolutely.
Crosby, phenomenal player, defensive player of the year candidate. His ability to play through that injury that he was going through to play against Patrick Mahomes in the game a couple weeks ago when he was doubtful and the first player who was doubtful in a couple years to actually play in a football game, absolutely Iron Man. I loved him coming out of the draft. Like I thought that he was going to be a hit. So yeah, I kind of view Max Crosby as the guy who kind of got away from the Vikings in terms of him and like Josh Sweat to me are like the two guys who I really wanted them to draft and I liked in the drafts and I think fit their athletic thresholds when they drafted Neil Hunter, which they kind of changed us on us a little bit, and we ended up getting guys like Jalen Holmes instead of that. So I
Little bit.
in terms of the Zimmer Spielman era, like that's definitely one of those where I kind of want it back. But he's such a good player, and it's the Daniil Hunter thing where he's so athletic and dominant as a rusher, but then he also has just the absolutely absurd motor, right? Where he's played almost every single snap. Like he played almost every single snap for that Raiders team last year. And they were not a great football team, right? And he's trying as hard as he can to get on the field again this year. So he is a truly special player. Um, None of the other guys on their defensive line really scare me all that much. I kind of feel like it's more of a and Tyree Wilson, right, who's the rookie number 5 overall pick, really has not been all that impactful of a player to them, particularly as a pass rusher. Like it took him weeks to even get a pass rush win, I think. So it's like from the defensive side of the ball, I don't think they're all that good. I don't think they're as good as the Vikings. I don't think they're a complete dumpster fire, and I think a couple of the solid players, and Patrick Graham, I think, is a pretty good defensive coach in general, have kind of helped raise that level. But with Justin Jefferson coming back, I think the Vikings passing game, if Josh Dobbs can play on time, should be able to pretty easily take them down. Right? The Raiders aren't a bottom feeder team to me, or since Josh McDaniels was fired, they're not a bottom feeder team, right? Like they were before that because the culture of that organization was just so toxic with him in charge. But they're also a team that I think the Vikings are clearly better than, and we wouldn't even be considering this really a question if Kirk Cousins was the quarterback, I think.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I don't really have a lot to add. I'll just say I just want to reiterate, how important this game is in terms of our season success. I think you just absolutely have to win this game, coming off a bye, especially. So,
Yeah, 100%.
Matt,
If you want to make the playoffs, you have to win this football game.
yep. Matt, any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up here?
Um, Not really. I just, I, I think the Vikings' talent development since under Brian Flores on defense and since Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah have gotten here has been impressive. And I think the players that we
Agreed.
talked about on this podcast, right, just the benefits that we've gotten, that's due to good management by both our coaching staff and our GM in terms of getting the right players in the building. So just wanted to shout out those guys too for I think they've done a really good job through 2 years so far.
Yeah, totally agreed with you there. Starting to see the fruits of that labor, and it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty impressive. So, all right, well, Matt, it's been a pleasure handing out bye week awards with you, talking about the Raiders game. Skull Vikes. Let's see how it goes. You can find us by searching for Kindred Skulls on YouTube if you want to watch our video content. You can also follow us on Twitter at Kindred Skulls. You can find Matt on Twitter at Fries Football. Yes, spelled exactly as it sounds. You can find Nick Olson, who wasn't able to join us today, by searching for Nick Olson NFL. That's his handle. And if you would like to check out my Instagram, you can follow me at the Gregg Blake on Instagram. I changed it. I don't know if you knew that. Um, so, yeah, we're available iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Matt, digital hugs.
Skull Vikings, digital
Skull
hugs.
Vikes. Goal, baby.
Another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score.